Okay.
Welcome to another podcast with the Cryptoscience Society.
I'm your host and president, Jason Cordova. To my left is the lovely and sexy voice having Jene Conrad.
Hello, and you're full of shit. We were just talking about how it's kind of interesting how the voice you hear inside your own head is very different from what other people hear.
Yes, this has been a kind of a tragedy throughout. I remember the first time I realized that, like my voice didn't sound the same way that it sounded to other people, that it sounds like to me. Yeah, it was a pretty big, an interesting revelation. I think I was 5, actually, maybe even younger, because my mom gave me this, like I had this old school like tape recorder with a little handle and a slide, and then you could just play back on the tape right away. And I'd like had my own radio show on there, so I sang, and I talked, I told stories. I actually have the tapes around. We can maybe one day, maybe if we get big enough where we have some bonus content.
Oh man,
where we can like.
That's a scary thought. Yeah, I think the first time I realized I was actually in college, and then I was so sad because I sound like my sister.
That's.
I thought like my sister has a good voice.
Sister's not so bad.
I know. Can we edit that out?
I hope so. I'll do what I can.
Thank you.
No promises.
Okay. Anyway, so why are we here today, Jason?
Why are we here? We are in the basement, like good, proper paranormal investigators should, recording our podcast for the Cryptoscience Society. We're going to be talking about an investigation into the possibility of extraterrestrial origin of UFOs. So, for all of our listeners,
what does that mean?
What does that mean? So jumping right into it, a lot of very nuts and bolts, sciencey minded kind of folks like to introduce the topic of UFOs from a perspective of very credible, convincing scientific evidence, and being objective. Not that we're not that mindset, or not of that mindset, but a lot of folks are hesitant to dip their toes in to the water of that. Like, let's just call it like we see it, call it like it is. When most people hear UFOs,
Dun, 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 dun.
they're thinking aliens, and it doesn't need to be. I don't feel like it necessarily needs to be such a faux pas, and that we can address the extraterrestrial hypothesis in a scientific manner and in a credible way. So that's why we're here.
So we're definitely connecting the idea of the UFO origins with extraterrestrials.
Yes.
Okay. Because in that way, that I won't start wandering into, like technology that we weren't aware of, that we saw.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, the theory that a lot of UFOs were just like military craft.
Right.
That just wasn't in circulation yet.
Right, like Black Project kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is actually completely it is a very relevant potential explanation for many of them. Honestly, personally, I feel like most of them fall
into that category.
Either a misidentified natural phenomena or something mundane explainable, and then there's been a lot of reports and studies that kind of estimate maybe 10%, or even more conservatively, maybe 5% of all reported UFOs are unexplainable.
Right.
And then from there, out of that unexplainable realm, there's probably a good portion of those that are, unknown black projects, high technology kind of stuff. But that doesn't discount the rest.
True. Well, it's kind of interesting too because it makes my since I just finally finished on Keel's like Muffin Prophecies, that idea of like craft that looked normal but then behaved oddly.
Oh yeah.
So I think that's something that would be interesting to kind of dive into a little bit as well. Absolutely.
Well, some listeners gave us some feedback after the first episode, which is pretty great. I love that collaborative back and forth.
We told you it was our first, so we were going to suck at
it. But also, we had some very positive stuff that was said about it. So thank you to all of those who paid a listen and gave us your feedback. So we have addressed, hopefully, we've addressed the sound issues. You can hear us loud and clear.
Yeah, and if we're too loud, thankfully you can just turn us down. It's easier to turn us down than to turn us up.
Right. Especially if you're, in a noisy coffee shop or driving to work and all that brand new Colorado traffic.
Oh God. It took me like an hour and 15 minutes to make it like 10 miles.
Mm-hmm. But you're here now.
I am. Okay, so should we start with just kind of like the current events and kind of what's happening?
Yeah, let's dive right into it. Number one, first on the list, we've got actually some kind of exciting new movie that's out, made by our friend.
Is it a movie or a documentary?
It's a documentary. Right.
Or a drama-sized documentary?
It's a documentary. Well, we saw Hunt for the Skinwalker. Mm-hmm. It's the same guy that made Hunt for the Skinwalker, Jeremy Corbell. And this one, it just premiered. It's about the Bob Lazar and the genesis of Area 51 and that whole mythos. Right? It's in the early 90s. This guy, Bob Lazar, came on the scene saying that he worked at Area 51, back engineering UFOs for the U.S. government. George Knapp was the journalist who broke the story, and he worked really hard with Bob to try to encourage him to share his story and go a little more public. And over the years, it's been more than 20 years, and he's stuck true to his story. And he's a pretty humble guy. He's pretty kind of avoided a lot of the limelight. It's very hard to get an interview with him. And Jeremy Corbell managed to pin him down and get a real updated interview for him. And from the reviews, my cousin with Alejandro Rojas at Open Minds Radio interviewed Jeremy. And they also had Bob Lazar at the UFO Congress a couple of years ago. And they did interview. They did do an interview with Bob, but they went easy on him. It was tactical. Want to bring him out, show him off to all the UFOers. You don't want to scare him.
Yeah.
Right? Don't want to scare him away. So this venue, he's comfortable in a room with one guy, and that's where he asked him the hard questions. So.
Well, no, I think, and it's interesting too, because I think any conversation about the origin of UFOs really has to start with Roswell and Area 51 and kind of all the little things that happened, and then kind of how throughout time it became like a bigger deal. Like certain people popped up and, brought light or brought attention to it. And now we have like so much, even if our fiction and our story making is based around Roswell. Like, your Men in Black, which we should talk about the movie Men in Black one day.
Yeah.
As a separate aside.
Oh, man. We got a whole...
Yeah, a whole episode on that coming. Which I thought was like, that movie's kind of brilliant. And it's a comedy. But in...
Wait, it's not a documentary?
Right, exactly. but sorry. Now I want to go on a tangent because I was like, but it was such a crafty use of mythology.
Right, it was. It was actually very well done, very fun, and it brought the idea into Whereas before it was like, before the movie, like, let's see, I think the only Men in Black reference I could think of in pop culture was the X-Files. In that, my favorite of all episode, Jose Agents from Outer Space, which Alex Trebek and
Oh yeah.
Jesse Ventura play Men in Black.
Oh yeah, that's right. I totally
Which
forgot
is
about that.
freaking awesome. Totally different take on the idea.
But yeah, so just kind of, it's just such a formidable point of our history, and if it, in terms of like the science and the paranormal of it, but also the myth making and the story creation that evolves from it. And it's always really fascinating. You really see that it's like one person that really kind of started that conversation, and that's really intriguing. And then also kind of how it allowed a lot of people to kind of have a platform to like talk about the really interesting experiences or sightings with objects that they couldn't identify.
That's true. Yep. So if you are interested in learning more about the Bob Lazar story, which ties right into the idea of extraterrestrial origin of UFOs, his whole story is that basically he was responsible for working on back engineering technology that was salvaged from a downed alien spacecraft. That is the fundamental core of his claim, and it's he's got a lot of supporters and a lot of detractors, and refined judgment. I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm really excited to see it, but I'm leaning towards, well, as my cousin says, Bob Lazar is firmly in his gray basket. as any good objective investigator should.
Right.
Yeah. And as any good investigators, who are some of the best investigators that you can even think of?
Oh, I don't know, Jason.
NASA's, they're pretty good.
Yeah, and we
they're
have
pretty
a
good.
We have a window up with like a title that says, "Has super intelligent aliens already visited Earth?" NASA scientists warn that extremely tiny visitors could have been too small for us to spot. Which is kind of funny.
That's right. It's NASA scientist named Silvano P. Colombano has called for a speculative physics Silvano P. has called for speculative physics open to alien existence. Academics want fundamental change in how humans imagine extraterrestrials, and they say that everything from their lifespan to their size would be incomprehensible to us. And he argues that any likely visitors could be extremely tiny and easily missed.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting thing to consider in general, because us humans are very good at anthropomorphizing everything outside of us, and so if there is an alien intelligent life forms, they have to somehow be humanoid looking,
right?
Or have to have corporeal form of some sort, and so it's kind of really interesting to then kind of take your mind into, like, I thought maybe, they mean like microbes on, right, or like annihilation. That's like an alien life form that's just sort of like a well, in my opinion, is a virus that lands on Earth. Spoiler alert. And then
wait, what's Annihilation?
Annihilation is an amazing movie with, oh my god, I forgot her name. She was in Black Swan, played Padme, Natalie Portman. So it's Natalie Portman. Her husband goes on this super secret mission, comes back really weird. She's this biologist. And
the whole thing was they sent the team because they were supposed to be like women.
Yeah.
All the other teams were men, and they're like, well, none of them came back. Maybe the women can handle it.
Yeah. And so it's really, really fascinating, and it's just kind of, but just from like, is it any? It's because it's kind of one of those stories you don't really know what's going on. In some ways, is it like a psychological exploration? But to me, it was like some sort of small, like this object from space lands, and it's like, wouldn't that be an interesting way of taking over the world, as like as a virus,
right, or
as like a microscopic organism that just kind of spreads or changes or evolves or adapts things,
right, which is it's an excellent point, and I think that does kind of play into this too. Like it's presenting an idea of an alien intelligence that is different than what we typically assume them to be, right? They're not the usual Hollywood monster kind of alien. This is kind of a they adapt, they mimic, and they and they blend in.
Yeah, or just like chameleons are thinking of them at like very small microscopic. Like it could still be very much intelligent and aware and functioning. They just look completely different.
Right. And it opens up the conversation of the whole idea, like, to avoid anthropomorphizing, right? Even look back to the immediate one jumps to my mind is like in 2010, 2001, A Space Odyssey. That story was the idea that the monolith is some kind of alien intelligence, or at least an interaction with an alien intelligence.
Right.
And so what they were doing there, and this was, I think Carl Sagan had a part in it. I know Arthur C. Clarke, obviously, he wrote the book. The intention was to get people thinking more along the lines of, like, aliens probably are not going to be what we expect them to be. Right?
Yeah, or like thinking of the movie Contact.
Contact's another good one.
Like just sort of like I'm in the form of what your brain can handle.
Right.
And then I thought that, and it's like I love that movie because it's like the most inspiring moment, I think, in a lot of cinema that never gets enough credit. Like that moment of like you took one tiny step into exploring the weird, and because you did that, someone else will take the next step. And so this idea of that unraveling mysteries might take lifetimes and hundreds and thousands of years for us to truly comprehend as a society.
Right.
And so I think like UFO and those origins of them finding really strange shapes in the sky is just one tiny puzzle piece, like one tiny sort of interesting phenomenon in like a sea of many.
Right. And that is a perfect segue into our next article by Lou Elizondo with To the Stars Academy. This one's a little bit old. It's about a month or so out.
Well, why don't you explain what To the Stars Academy is first?
Yeah, so To the Stars Academy, let's see.
Cool history.
The long story short, Tom DeLonge, eccentric money guy. He was a guitarist and singer for the band Blink-182. His longtime interest in UFOs, and he, after the band, there's rumors that the band actually broke up partially because of he was so obsessed with UFOs. I think those claims are a little bit inflated. Like everybody knows, like, yeah, he was into it, but the creative differences were more of a factor, and then so on and so forth. He had a couple other side projects, but his latest big thing is this To the Stars Academy, where basically he's using his money and influence to get the attention and actually get the ear of high-ranking politicians in order to start having those conversations. He actually was given the Investigator of the Year award by the International UFO Congress, I think last year, was it?
That's interesting.
Because he's the one that did it. And a lot of the UFOers were really mad because, who's this rock star comes out of nowhere. Yeah, who's this kid think he is? and
Well, and that's kind of like, but who else too? Because there's such an interesting thread of like paranormal,
right,
and musicians. There's like this interesting tie-in, just within like conspiracy theories and kind of what a lot of people say about them. But then also too, like certain sort of genres and music sort of lends itself to being like the backdrop of the paranormal.
Right.
And so it's just kind of really interesting that some of the biggest people who influence the trajectory of our society are musicians.
Right. They're the cool kids.
Yeah.
Right. So not only is Tom DeLonge the guy who managed to get this information, and And by information, what I mean is specifically he had some meetings with the only name that jumps immediately to mind is John Podesta. So he was a campaign manager for Hillary, and he's actually been in politics for a long time, working in and out of the kind of the system in that regard. But with To the Stars Academy, so long story short, in all of these dealings, he's gotten to collect. He founded this organization called To the Stars Academy, which is intended. Their mission statement on their website is basically to create a public interest in the outer edges of science and the understanding of phenomena has always been suffocated by mainstream ideology and bureaucratic constant. We believe there are transformative discoveries within our reach that will revolutionize the human experience, but they can only be accomplished through unrestricted support of breakthrough research, discovery, and innovation. To the Stars Academy of the Arts and Science has mobilized a team of most experienced, connected, and passionately curious minds from the U.S. intelligence community, including the CIA and the Department of Defense, that have been operating under the shadows of top secrecy for decades. The team members all share a common thread of frustration and determination to disrupt the status quo, wanting to use their expertise and credibility to bring transformative science and engineering out of the shadows and collaborate with global citizens to apply that knowledge in a way that benefits humanity. They are FMR Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, FMR Senior Intelligence Officer of the CIA, former, that's what this means, FMR, former Advanced Systems Director for Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, former Director of Programs to Investigate Unidentified Aerial Threats, group of distinguished physicists, geneticists, molecular biologists, award-winning storytellers. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what they're up to. They've got a wealth of information. They've got a whole bunch of things going on. They've got all these big-minded people that are coming together to try to do it.
Like, why not? Did I have groups?
Yeah, we can't edit.
Sorry, I just so you know, on the audio, why I said gross is that I apparently had something gross on my nose.
Is something dripping?
I don't think anything's dripping. I think it's just I'm cold. My nose dripped, so that's why I said gross.
Weird. All right.
So, okay.
Strange phenomenon. The walls, if the walls bleed, I wouldn't really be surprised.
Well, the cat's trying to get in.
The cat is trying to get in.
She feels very, very alone.
She is a part of this podcast. She's the Archmage.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of cool. I think what's really interesting, too, is that, if people have so many questions or ideas, why not go and search for it? Why not do it with, the scientific method in mind?
Mm-hmm.
Bring that creative sort of energy together. Because it's if I had money, what would I do with it,
Right. What would I do with money? I would buy all of the Beatles Sgt. Pepper uniforms and use them as a house coat.
I thought you were going to talk about.
You think I'm kidding?
I don't think you're kidding. But I thought you were going to go a little bit more practical with your nefarious ideas for the paranormal.
That comes next.
That comes next. First is Sgt. Pepper uniforms.
First Sgt. Pepper uniforms.
Touche.
What would you do?
What would I do? I would probably I'd be practical, unfortunately, first, and get out of debt, save some money.
Mm-hmm.
And what outlandish, weird thing would I get? I don't know. I'd bribe the Vatican for all their material.
So you think You think you've got enough money to bribe the Vatican?
No, probably not. But like, I haven't, because I watched this really interesting documentary about how a lot of like artifacts get stolen from the Middle East because of conflict and war and stuff, and how like London is this really huge hub of like black market artifacts. It's really depressing. So part of me would be like a black market hustler for a little bit, because and like repatriate.
Right, like be that like field
Swoop
agent,
in.
be like, oh yeah,
Indiana Jones reverse style.
yeah, right.
Instead of
Like, oh
stealing.
yeah, no, I'll buy that. I'll buy that.
Because I think that there's a lot, and that like a tangent for another episode though. I think that there's a lot of really cool, interesting archaeological information that's just sitting in vaults of like rich people.
Yeah, I know.
So, because like
or just like on their mantle.
Right,
or
like Iraqi like magic bowls.
Oh
that a lot of people have stolen like actual tablets of like really ancient material. So I think after kind of getting out of it, I would probably just be a reverse Indiana Jones.
That would be pretty awesome.
So
I'll join you on that. Actually, yeah, let's pool our resources together, because actually the looting of the Baghdad Museum is out of everything, all of the tragedies of the Iraq War. That is, I mean, that's high on the list.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and just kind of, and because of how lucrative it is, how many, especially it triggered a lot of people to start digging, and so there's just a lot of really intriguing information that I think would clarify a lot of interesting civilization-y stuff. It would just be fascinating. I think it would get. There's just so much information that just got looted and hidden, or even in the London Museum, there is so much information and artifacts that are just in a dark catacomb somewhere,
right,
that's never even been like cataloged or looked at.
Yeah,
or maybe I'm wrong, you can like correct me, but I'm pretty, like there's a lot of stuff that's just hasn't been
there's a lot of stuff out there that's not been given its proper due.
Right. For study.
And for whatever reason, right? Like Pueblo mummies in a roadside shop.
Yeah.
That get suddenly scooped up and then mistaken for alien bodies. And
yeah.
That's an episode on its own too.
That's very true.
So let's dive into it, shall we?
Yep.
All right. So, and I credit if anybody wants to go back and reference our stuff for this podcast today, we've got stuff up on our blog, the Crypto Science Society Journal. If you go to our website, cryptosciencesociety.com, go to the journal tab, you can find all this good stuff here and the contact for future episodes. And so this was one of our earliest journal entries, and it was submitted by my good friend Dion Ernst. I knew her as Dion Langley back in middle school. And
I met her.
I don't know that you did. You might have.
That's too bad.
You might have. She's cool. I tried to get a hold of her for the podcast. Maybe we'll have her on
cool.
if she's available. But cool lady.
Still
Actually, we connected with So the reason that we connected back in middle school was because of the book Communion. Like we were both reading Communion. And it was like, oh, you're weird. I'm weird.
Let's
be
talk
weird
about
together. Yeah. So it is, yeah. Again, add it to the list.
Add it to the list.
Add it to the list.
Let's go back to our tangent.
Yes. Look, we are actually on topic. We are on topic.
Mysterious stuff. Well, in terms of like, especially the origins of like flying UFOs, anyone out there familiar with Carl Jung?
Yes, I know. Carl Gustav Jung.
Jung. Yeah, I know. I'm a bad American with my accents. He was always my favorite out of the two. But one of his
out of the two? There's only two.
There's only two. Fathers of psychology. I don't know. It's kind of like.
So wait a minute. If there's two fathers, I thought.
Penis envy. No, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I find it fascinating.
Don't be sorry.
I find it fascinating, like in terms of like psychology camps, or kind of where things kind of broke off in many ways. And there's more than that. But Jung and
Freud.
Thank you. I can't believe I was like blanking on his name.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
That? I feel like Freud's full of shit. And I feel like you either are in one of those camps. Like you're psychology, I'm creating a false dichotomy here. Because there's way more than that, and a lot more has evolved from there. But like there's like you're either the Freud camp or you're the Jung. I'm gonna be so conscious of that now. You're the Carl camp, in many ways. So you either are kind of really interested into the archetypes, global consciousness, how like myth is made, or it's all about like everything's phallic and we're just a bunch of penis envying societal people.
It's all about the
or like a phallocentric.
Phallocentric.
Yeah, it's a new word I found. I'm like reading this really cool book about archaeology. And so one of the things.
Sorry to be so crass, people.
Yeah, sorry.
Archaeology, I know it's terrible. No offense to archaeologists. We love archaeologists.
But like kind of going back, what I found what's really fascinating about his work is that towards the end of his life, really got interested in UFOs and the UFO phenomenon and extraterrestrials. And and he was kind of going from like two different camps. At first, it was kind of this idea of like this global mythology that we were creating to kind of explore some sort of like collective psychological thing. But towards the end of his life too, he started like it became more of like a tangible thing for him of just being like, I wonder what this is all about. And I think, because there does seem to be a time period where we kind of move from, like the age of like the Victorian age and kind of really kind of interacting with the occult and ghosts and that kind of paranormal stuff to
like spiritualism
to moving into more technological.
Right now we're doing paranormal investigations. Everybody's got your equipment.
Yeah.
Like what kind of equipment you got? Okay, got my K2s and my.
And just sort of kind of like how it started to really shift, and how we're kind of even seeing like the merging of like the occult and the UFO origin kind of like coming together to coalesce a little bit. So it's just like really fascinating to kind of see that like pop up through time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it really is because technology was different. We started seeing more weird stuff because, we were creating flying machines.
Right.
And we were creating, the Lindenberg and, the Wright brothers creating the airplane. Right. And helicopters.
So this idea of like manifestation, right? And that the phenomenon maybe, and this is what Jung was touching on, because I have his book upstairs. Yeah. I have the UFO, Jung's on UFOs. This idea that so archetypal kind of thing, it's that this psycho interactive phenomenon. Mm-hmm. If this is indeed something else, something outside of our own minds, that also plays into the Mothman prophecies thing too. Yeah. Is this idea of a psycho-reactive phenomenon, is whatever this intelligence is, it's manifesting in a way that we are going to interpret it, or we're going to understand it, right? Or is it's just doing whatever it does, and we interpret it however we've evolved through time. Because you take Betty and Barney Hill abduction scenario. If you strip that down, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Betty and Barney Hill were a couple in the 50s, 60s. Right. Mid-60s. I'm going to get eaten alive on the air. I don't remember the exact date.
Oh, don't worry about it. Basically, all that stuff happened in the 60s, right?
Yeah, it was in the 60s. So they were driving home, and they were missing some time. They allegedly got taken up by a UFO. interacted with some beings and sent back on their way, and they had the after effects of it. They had the PTSD, they did hypnotic regressions, and they had burning eye stuff, that everything. So here's what, but if you take that same scenario and, like, I don't know, put it back to, a farmer in Europe in the early 15th century or something, right? And they're walking through the woods and they see these fairy lights come down, and then they're taken to this magical fairy realm where they're interacting with tiny beings with big eyes, and then they're in this otherworldly place, and then they're gone longer than they thought they were, and then sent back on their way, and nobody believes them. Maybe their clothes are on backwards, or they're in a different way. But this idea that, like, were you abducted by fairies or was it aliens, right? Kind of depends on what time period you are in the culture.
And it's interesting too, because you make a lot of people can make the argument, well, it's always just aliens. But, like, what if it's not?
Right. Like, what if it's something else altogether? That's what we think they are now.
Yeah, we think that's what they are now because that's kind of that's how we can conceptualize it, because of how we've constructed our society now. And does it matter?
Right. Does it matter?
Doesn't matter. Like, if what was angels and God at one point as fairies is now aliens. Is that what matters? Is that what we care about? What I think is more, like, really interesting is that something weird is happening.
Right.
And we might not know what it is, but it seems to kind of pop up through time.
Right.
And so if we really look at, like, our myths and kind of how our myths are constructed and sort of that information that's in them.
Right.
Then kind of like, well, why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the why?
Right.
Behind it all?
Well, the why. Why do we think this is happening? I mean, you could even say that, angelic lore is extraterrestrial, right? Because they're not human and they're not from this world, right?
But what if they are just in a different pocket?
A different pocket.
What does it mean to be an extraterrestrial, even?
Right. Well, let's define it. Someone who's not from Earth.
Right.
But that actually that is a good to loop back to the Stars Academy stuff. Now, I wanted to mention about Lou Elizondo, who he is and why he's important. Basically, he was the director of the program ATIP. It was the Advanced Aerial Phenomenon Threat Protection Program within the Department of Defense. He used his position to access government funds to analyze UFOs as they applied to the potential threat for U.S. military action in flying around in airspace. And he, in interviews and stuff he's written about, he claims that, as far as he understands, as far as they have been able to determine, is that, one, there are no known technologies on this planet that have created them. Okay, and then we go harken back to that, the 95 or so % of easily misidentified kind of objects. Yeah. These are the really juicy ones.
The ones that we all want to get our hands on.
The all one we want to get our hands on. If you've looked up the Tic Tac UFO video where the USS, was it the Truman? I can't remember now. It was one of the aircraft carrier. It had their air group was able to. They got on video that the fighters interacted with this object that was nicknamed the Tic Tac UFO because it looks like a Tic Tac flying around. The
cigar, the sausage thing that always pops up throughout time.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of interesting too. It's like you have cigar. Sorry, I meant cigar. certain sort of commonalities and patterns throughout time.
Phallocentrism.
It's all Alice. Yeah, and so kind of like even because like Jim, one of the persons in our group, did a recent article about Bigfoot, and one of the things that he said that I thought was really fascinating was this idea of what's intriguing is the totality of the evidence, and just sort of kind of how we rationalize it away. And so I think that's what's really fascinating is that even that 5% or that small number of stuff is that we have enough collection of data to be like, this is interesting.
Right.
You know, especially just like certain shapes that certain spacecraft come into.
Right.
So, you know, like the triangle, the cigar, there does seem to be some commonalities.
Right. And these are commonly seen throughout history, right? Like there's a lot of historical accounts. So that other aspect though of Elizondo's claim is that through this work, not only were they confident that these technologies are not produced by any known technology here on Earth, but that he speculates even that it could be extra dimensional.
Right.
And taking it that step further. And that's what this article that he had written on the blog with To the Stars Academy was, that I guess the core of what he's trying to say is what we know and what we believe are not always the same thing. And then he goes on to explain how our perception of fact influences our worldview. And this is very important when it comes to the discussion on this topic, as far as, you know, all of this tying in together, right?
Yeah, or like how different phenomena interact with each other.
Right.
How when you have a UFO, you also have other things that pop up. Which I guess Mothman is the next thing we should probably do.
Possibly. Okay.
Because I'm pretty sure in our last episode we talked about psychoactive phenomenon as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's really interesting. So just kind of thinking not just extraterrestrial, but interdimensionally.
And again, that is probably a product, because he's certainly not the first person to propose that as a possibility. Right.
But like I think with like our jump in a lot of scientific thought in terms of like quantum mechanics and physics, gravitational, the CERN collider, the idea of being able to unravel reality as we know it is now definitely a part of the fabric of our realities.
Right.
And so like so now we're thinking, you know, less, you know, interstellar and more interdimensional.
Right.
And are those two things kind of related sometimes?
Or even interplanetary. Because I was just thinking back, you know, in the 50s, like with the George Adamski days.
Right.
And he was claiming he's talking to people from Venus.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's
like as our consciousness expands in terms of what's our reality in space-time, the further and further away our theories and perceptions become too.
Right.
And then almost in on itself as well. So it's kind of the whole idea of cells, planets, same thing. So kind of, you know, maybe that's why I like Men in Black too, the whole marble image.
Yeah.
The aliens playing with these marbles of galaxies. And kind of sometimes I always think about like, what if there's like some microbial organism that's kind of like a galaxy. It's got a bunch of aliens living on it.
Right. Right. Now, I kind of think that too. You know how people come up to us like every day at work, like, how are you doing? Well, living the dream. Like, oh, really? Whose dream is it? And then they stop and they're just like, they have their existential moment. We're like, all right, off to work.
Yeah, that whole like Rush song, like, is the butterfly dreaming of you, or are you dreaming of the butterfly?
That's right.
Which is always it's just an interesting thought to talk about, especially in terms of like UFOs and where they come from.
Right.
Do they come from our brains? Do they come from space?
Do
they come from a pocket of reality? Do they come from underneath the sea? Are they from Mars? There's like all these intense, infinite possibilities.
That's right. Yeah. So in Dion's report, she noted Dr. Frank Drake and his famous Drake equation, which basically postulates the possibility of alien life, or a complex, intelligent alien life throughout our galaxy. A lot of people have taken some stabs at it. I'm not sure where she came up with the number here for over 10,000 in the Milky Way galaxy alone, because there's a lot of variables that don't actually have numbers to be put in them, right? Ultimately, it's a speculative exercise.
Right.
Now that we know there are thousands of...
The probability alone.
There are...
Mathematically.
So, only about 10 years ago, was it? No, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we only knew for certain that there were 9 planets in our solar system. At the time, Pluto being classified as a planet, now opened up to recognizing the virtual array of dwarf planets in the solar system that Pluto fits into the category of. So back to 8 planets in our solar system. Now in the 90s, then we start finding extrasolar planets with a variety of different methods. Now we're up to more than 2,000 verified,
bodies,
confirmed
within our solar
planets,
system.
not in our solar system. I'm talking actual planets
orbiting
other stars.
I got lost for a moment.
Other planets, and our own solar system. That's its own thing.
One thing, yeah.
But now we know for certain that there are more than 2,000 planets orbiting other stars, and there's more coming in every day.
Right.
Whereas scientists are speculating that they're probably more likely that a star has at least one planet than it doesn't have any planets at all. And out of those, then you start adding new variables.
It's really like Star Trek.
Whether or not, yeah. Whether or not, how many of those planets are actually habitable through the lens of what we think habitable means.
And then we could think about like terraforming and the possibility of that technology.
So you're saying
that's
that
far away though. So like planets that we say might not necessarily be habitable, but could one day be.
Right.
Like our moon can be habitable.
Or yes, our moon can be habitable. It's not habitable to life as we know it right now. Right? Like us. Right?
But there might be microbes.
We need a suit to go onto the moon and walk around. Right? Yeah, there might be microbes there living. We know there's a little bit of water hanging around. Maybe they're hanging out in the water. Maybe they're dormant in sand, stuff like that. But as we know it, we just don't know for certain that life in the way that we know life to be can exist there. So, but you brought up a really awesome point there, because say if there's a civilization that is sufficiently advanced, say even maybe 100 to 200 years beyond where we are now, right? Or maybe not even necessarily beyond, maybe they're a civilization that took a different track, right? Applied their technology to environmentalism instead of militarism, right? Or, any number of different tracks that you could take technology and to be in a really advanced way in some places and be completely backwards in others, right? Where am I going with this? The idea of an advanced civilization that's out there, like maybe they could have terraformed another planet, and that makes more of those planets out there habitable than others. The Tabby star, I think, but when she wrote this, it was Tabby star hadn't even been discovered yet. This is a star. It's about 14 light years away, if I remember right. And it was through the transit method. It was they noticed it doing some weird things, and this NASA scientists as the official explanation coming out and saying this could actually be some kind of alien megastructure around the star, like a Dyson sphere. Now, they put a lot of resources into it. See if they SETI pointed all their telescopes at it and said, like, what are we going to find? What are we going to find? Probably nothing, because if they're able to build a Dyson sphere, they're probably not going to be using radios. But all due respect to SETI, they're actually out there looking for aliens, which is more than a lot of other scientists are doing. Right. And they're looking for things in a very, very specific kind of way, which I guess we could dive into at another time as well. But ultimately, I think what's exciting about Tabby Star, for me, and the idea of all of that is that, I mean, these are NASA scientists saying, like, this could be something like on Star Trek.
Right.
And, like, everybody really wants it to be that. But good scientists hold out, right? Because, like, no matter how good the data is, we can always say the best they can do is maybe.
Yeah.
Right? And right now, it's still very firmly in the gray basket.
But yeah, and that's still very cool.
Yeah.
Like that's still really affirming
Mm-hmm.
and interesting.
Yeah.
And mystical. Science can have that like mysticism that's really intriguing.
It's a magical mystery tour.
Yeah, and that's just fascinating. And it's also interesting to kind of think about. So, like, let's say it is.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we even could get to them, they could be extinct.
Right.
Their solar system could be uninhabitable.
That's the thing. Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting is, like, here's all these civilizations that are potentially out there in infinite ways that we'll never even be able to interact with.
Yeah.
Simply because of how far away everything is.
That's the thing. It's 14,000 light years away. Tabby Star is 14,000 light years away. That means the light, what we're seeing of this potential Dyson sphere, is 14,000 years old.
Galaxy far away.
Right.
A long time ago.
Whatever happened, it's 14,000 years old already.
Yeah.
If that is, and what basically, for those of you who don't understand what a Dyson sphere is, it's basically a big mechanical structure that's put around a star at about the orbit of where a planet would be, and you have all the planet city kind of stuff on the inside. So basically, you're collecting the energy of the star on this big mega superstructure that's like putting your star in a big, like,
in a basket.
Yeah, like you're putting a star in a basket.
And you're basket, the star basket.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating.
And
I'm thinking of that information too, of like that's like a UFO, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
It's an unidentified object.
It's an unidentified space object. What would we call that? Space, because they fly.
Space object. Unidentified body. Planet.
Unidentified.
Somebody come up with a really
extraterrestrial
cool
body.
name.
Yeah, we need an acronym
and
for
then
that.
Tag us.
Yes, great.
We hashtag now.
We have a hashtag.
Oh,
Science
that's right.
Crypto.
Science Crypto. Okay.
Now, on that point, we are running out of time. We've burned up all this time talking about aliens. Who would have known? But the one thing I did want to point on is that Dion did a good job of expressing this idea of distance and time and all of that. And so she writes, Alpha Centauri is the closest star to our sun at a distance of 4.2 light years away. At our current technology, at the speed which we are able to reach the moon, it would take over 1,000 years to get there. Einstein's theory of relativity also gives us universal speed limit, which means we cannot exceed the speed of light, which is 186,000 light years, 186,000 miles a second. Even if we could near this speed, it would take over 4 years to get to this star. One alternative notion of space travel, however, utilizes the theoretical binding of the fabric of space itself, rather than the conventional belief that the shortest distance between 2 points has to be a straight line. This type of theory allows us to bend that line as if folding a string to bring two endpoints together. Yes, a tesseract. The equations of general relativity allow for the theoretical possibility to bend the fabric of space and take a shortcut, otherwise known as a wormhole. Although certainly not conventional, the theory is still a mathematical possibility. There have been many scientists throughout history that have publicly claimed their opinions regarding the impossibility of technologies that we now know today are possible. Who knows what might be capable in 100, 500, or even 1,000 years.
Well, that's what I find so fascinating about acoustics.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Go on.
Sorry. Well, and I know the DM drive's kind of been proven to just like be kind of not really a thing, but I still find it fascinating, and that potential of like using sound as a mechanism for travel. Because like sound and sorry for the scientists out there if I'm like completely off base, because sound, at its like how I understand it, is sort of like the measurement of space through time, in a way. Because like when you have a musical and you're like singing music, it's like this ethereal thing. And then we mark it through like linear space. So we kind of organize it and structure it.
A sound it's a wave of vibration.
A vibration
through a fluid.
Through a fluid, yeah. Thank you. See, I'm not a physicist.
You're not a real scientist.
Not a real scientist.
You're just a social scientist. Defend your thesis, Jene.
Damn it.
Defend.
And so what I find.
Have at thee and your thesis.
And so what I think would be really, but it's still interesting, like if we think about like water as a vehicle for movement, and using like those, I mean, you would still need like an energy source. What I'm saying is like using those sound waves or that wave as a wave of
rad, bro. Hang 10, rad sound wave.
I've done too many streams in my life, but it's still like, I don't know, in terms of my myth making.
What are too many shrooms?
I don't know.
How many shrooms are too many?
When you're vomiting. I guess what, in terms of like approaching this from a socialist like mythology, psychological kind of perspective that I have a tendency to do, is that from like a creative perspective of how I interact with sound, or like how sound environments have like a really big impact on our bodies and our biology. You know, like, sound can make us ill. You know, it could make us euphoric. It has like a biological response to us.
It does.
And who's to say that it cannot be used in other forms,
right?
In terms of travel.
Mm-hmm.
Because you and I have talked about like how Saturn's rings sing.
Mm-hmm.
Just using that as a mechanism for pinpointing a trajectory is interesting.
Something kind of like as a navigation, right?
Yeah.
There's pulsars, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good example of like weird stuff that the universe does in sounds that it makes that could be useful. You know, they're like a beacon.
Fluid.
They're light. Yeah. Yes, there's a lot more to space than we used to think it was, right? It's not just a vacuum. It's not just a void. There's even theories that time itself is a fluid, and that it could be possible to approach the idea of faster than light travel from a fluid dynamics problem through space-time rather than just throwing the egg through the...
Well, that's why I think figuring out a way to travel via our currents in the ocean would be intriguing. Like, I have like this cool science fiction idea.
Yeah.
Kind of having like this egg spaceship.
Like there's a Gulf Stream
kind of thing, and
an
then
interstellar Gulf Stream of sorts.
Yeah, it uses the ocean.
Right.
And if a random scientist does see this, like tell him. Like I did talk to a physicist, and he did say that it sounded intriguing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I'll say that. Interesting, but I don't know the math yet that well on it.
Exactly.
So, but it would be really interesting then if you had like a structure. It would be only a one-way travel system because then the structure would have to break away,
right?
In order to kind of.
Now, that said, though, there is a physicist named Alcubierre, who is a Mexican physicist who worked out the math necessary for faster than light travel. The problem is we don't have the materials for it. If you go online, check out the Alcubierre drive, and it looks like an egg with a disc around the outside of it, And basically what it does, it's kind of like a pinch field.
So I thought of this. It's already been thought of.
Kind of.
God damn it.
No. They're like tapping into that whole thing. Collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Drop your young on us. And ride that wave to the end. All right. And on that note, we are out of time.
Yep.
Thank you very much for joining us. We hope we didn't stray too far off topic. If you want to get a little deeper into the actual, read Dion's report, go on to cryptosciencesociety.com and look for the journal tab all the way at the bottom, which is the last one down there on the bottom. And if you are interested in following us, check out all the usual suspects at Instagram. We are Science Crypto on Instagram. Crypto Science Society, all one word, Crypto Science Society on Facebook. And we've got a YouTube channel. And what else do we have?
We got a lot of the basics covered. So.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to our awesome graphic design team, Eddie Nori. He is a one-man team. Yes, I called him a team.
Amazing content.
He's responsible for that cool crow logo image you see on the top. And, of course, Dion Ernst for doing the bulk of the research for this episode. And, of course, all of the members of the Crypto Science Society, past, present, and future.
Yeah.
This dimension and beyond.
Till then, next time.
Till next time. Thanks for listening.